everyone. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to use layer masks in Photoshop. Open up this document in Photoshop once you've downloaded it from Teams and make sure that you can see your layers panel here on the right-hand side. The goal of this assignment is to learn how to remove the backgrounds from each of these 4 images. So let's start with the top left and we'll make our way to the bottom right. First thing you need to do is make sure that you have the correct layer selected. So in your layers panel, find the smiley face layer. It should be on top. From there, we're going to select a selection tool that would be best for selecting the dark parts of the smiley face. Now keep in mind you have selection tools near the top of your toolbar, marquee tools, lasso tools, as well as quick selection and the magic wand tool. Think about which one is going to work best for selecting the black. We could use the magic wand because it's a similar color. And the quick selection tool would also probably be a really easy, quick tool to use. I'm going to go ahead and choose magic wand. I think it'll be even faster because it's all the same color. All you should have to do is click in the dark areas to make a selection. Once you have everything you need selected, we're going to create a layer mask. Now remember, the purpose of a layer mask is to hide parts of an image that you don't want to see, or sorry, parts of a layer that you don't want to see. So in this case, I don't want to see the white background. So we're selecting the parts of the image that we want to keep visible, and then the layer mask is going to hide the rest. Keep in mind it's non-destructive and we can always adjust it at any time. This is actually your layer mask button here on this little pop-up toolbar. You can also find it at the very bottom of the layers panel. Once you add a layer mask, what you should see is that the white background has disappeared and the areas that you have selected are what remain visible. That looks great. Let's go to the next one. Let's go ahead and select the rose layer. And we're going to do the same thing, but this time we might want to switch our selection tool. And I'm going to go ahead and zoom in as well because we're looking at a little bit more of a complex image versus the smiley face. Now, could we use the magic wand? Yes, you could select based on color, and you just have a little bit more work to do because you'd want to select not only the red, but the green and the black. Instead, I think that the quick selection tool would be faster. All right, remember with the quick selection tool, like any other selection tool, to start on add to selection, and you can always go back and subtract if you got too much. With the quick selection tool, you can adjust the size of the brush, and you want to make sure that the size of the brush is never bigger than the area that you're trying to select. So this size would be good for the top of the rose, but not so good for the stem. So change the size as needed. I like using the keyboard shortcuts, which are the bracket tools on the keyboard, and I can adjust them much quicker that way. So you can click around or you can click and hold to basically paint those areas in. I'm going to make the brush smaller and be very careful not to stick the brush outside of the area I'm trying to select. Otherwise, it's going to start to select the white background. Go ahead and keep doing this until you've selected everything you need. All right, let's take a look at my selection. As you can see, not perfect. I can go back and deselect some of that white background. So I'm going to go up to the top of my options bar, choose the subtract, and I'm going to go ahead and click in those areas and make my brush smaller when I need to. Make sure that here you're only selecting the white areas that you don't want. All right, once you are happy with your selection, let's go ahead and add a layer mask. It should hide anything that we didn't have selected. But if you look, it didn't do a perfect job. So we're going to make a couple adjustments using the brush tool. So you can see all this little area here that wasn't perfect with my selection. So let's go ahead and make sure on the layer that we have the mask chosen, which is our black and white image. And then we're going to go over to our toolbar. We want to use the brush tool, this one here. Now the brush tool can adjust the layer mask by painting black to hide things that we don't want, or with painting with white to reveal the things that we've hidden. You'll see the black and white at the bottom of your toolbar. If you have different colors, use the little mini black and white boxes to reset to the default black and white. You can use the arrows to switch between. Your foreground color is the top color, and your background color is the bottom color. Make sure that your foreground color is black since we want to remove the white that we can see here. I'm going to zoom in so I can see. and make my brush just big enough. And I'm going to go ahead and paint the areas as best I can. If you're looking at really tiny areas, make sure that you adjust the size of your brush. Right, and lastly, this little piece down here. Perfect. That looks great. Let's go to our next image. So on the bottom left, we have the moon and the stars. So the goal is to keep the moon and the stars, but we want to remove this dark blue background. Let's make sure that we have that layer selected and then choose a selection tool that's going to work best. I think because we have really obvious colors that we could probably go back to the magic wand tool. So I'm going to go ahead and just click inside each of the stars and moon. Zoom in if needed so that you can get the magic wand tool inside. Once you have everything selected that you need, we'll add a layer mask. Okay, that looks good. Let's add our layer mask. The layer mask should hide the dark background, and now all we have is the moon and the stars, which look really good. You can always zoom in to see if you need to adjust any of your masks. I think we're good. All right, on to our last one, which is the succulent. This is going to be the most difficult one because we're looking at a real photograph, which is always going to have more color and more detail, which does make things harder to select. Let's go ahead and go to that last layer, make sure the succulent layer is selected, and let's find a tool that we think is going to be good for this selection. Because it's a very organic shape, our marquee tools and lasso tools might not work the best, although your magnetic lasso tool could work really well. I do find the quick selection tool to be easier though than the magnetic lasso tool. So I'm going to make sure that I'm on add to selection in my options bar. And I'm going to start with a bigger brush here in the center and just click and drag. I'm going to include the hand for this assignment as well. And as I get to the edges, I'm going to have to lower my brush and make sure that I didn't miss anything. So I'm going to make my brush a little bit smaller and click and drag in these areas. Make sure you don't miss like the tops of the succulent. You're going to have to make your brush really small. I'm changing the size of my brush really quickly using the bracket keys on your keyboard. All right, once you've refined your selection, we're going to add a layer mask. Now, the better the selection you do, the easier this is going to be. Because right now, if I were to add a layer mask, you'll notice that a lot of the tops and edges of my succulent aren't there. They've disappeared because they weren't in my original selection. And it makes it a lot more difficult when I go into my brush tool using white and then just trying to guess and paint it back in. Because a lot of times when I do that, I'm going to start to paint in the background as well. So it just gives me a lot more work to do. So instead, I'm going to undo. You can do Control Z on your keyboard, and we're going to go back to the selection and just spend some time here, and feel free to switch around your selection tools. If you're not liking the quick selection, you can choose something else, and go through and make sure that you've got everything. If you're having a hard time getting the very edges of the succulent, we might want to switch to our polygonal lasso tool. And as you can see here, the selection still remains. So as long as we're on add to selection in our options bar, we can add in these tops. And the polygonal lasso tool, and then give it a double click. Because it only makes straight edge selections, it'll do a good job with the tops of these succulents. So I'm going to click at the very top pointy part, down, and then a quick double click to make sure it activates the selection. Okay, I think that's looking really good. The only thing I noticed down by the hand is that there's a little bit of background here. So I'm gonna go ahead and go to subtract and just make sure that this little triangle here is not in the selection. All right, let's go ahead and see what that looks like by adding a layer mask. And that looks really nice. Now, if you zoom in and you see that any parts are missing, we could make adjustments with our brush. Or if you miss something or need to add it back in. So little areas like this, make sure your mask is selected. We're gonna go to our brush tool. Now this time we wanna make sure that we reveal, because it looks like we're missing pieces of the succulent. So white is going to help to reveal or to show or make visible the parts that we missed. So I'm gonna go ahead and just take my time painting some of the edges of these succulents back in. And it might be a little confusing since part of the succulent is white, but that is it. If you paint too much though, it's gonna start to reveal the background. So take your time here as well to paint back any missing details. All right, that looks great. So this is what the finished product should look like. All of the images should have the backgrounds removed. And look really precise. So now that we're done, let me show you how to save and export. We're going to start by saving as a Photoshop file. So let's go up to File, Save As. And anytime that we save as, we want to make sure that we're saving to our OneDrive. Unlike Lightroom, we're not able to just save right to the Lightroom cloud. So we need to make sure we're saving to OneDrive so that if anything happens to your device, it's still on the cloud and we don't lose the work. So if you make a folder for our class, you can stay nice and organized. And we're going to call this Your Name dash Layer Mask Practice. Notice that the file format, the type is Photoshop. We want to keep that, so go ahead and hit save. Okay, so whether you are finished or not, you still want to make sure that you do this because you can always go back and adjust the layers individually. The last step is exporting, and we don't want to export until we are completely done because exporting is going to squish these layers together into a JPEG file. If you're ready for that, let's go to File, Export, and we're going to quick export as a JPEG. All right, if it leads you to a different screen, just hit Export on the bottom right, and then it should lead you to this window. We're going to save in the same spot we did as the Photoshop file, so in OneDrive, possibly in a digital photo folder with the same name, and notice the file type is now a JPEG. This is the file that you want to make sure that you turn into Teams.